Why did the laughter stop the moment she spoke? No one remembered the exact second it happened, only the silence afterward. The kind that spreads through a group when something fragile has just been broken. She stood there on the blistered tarmac, the heat rippling off the concrete, the aircraft looming behind her like a steel judgment. Too small, too young, too quiet. 18, they'd said. The number hung over her like an accusation. They didn't see a soldier, they saw a problem. She adjusted the strap of her rifle case, the weight pulling against her shoulder, and kept her eyes forward. The comments rolled around her like distant thunder, half jokes, half contempt. Mascot, liability, public relations mistake. She'd heard worse in training. She learned early that dignity wasn't loud. It didn't argue, it waited. The lieutenant stood in front of her now, close enough that she could smell tobacco and dust on his breath. He talked about rules of engagement, about mistakes that went viral, about bodies on the news. He talked like someone who believed fear was a teaching tool. She let him finish. Then she spoke, calm, precise, no apology in her voice. The laughter didn't come back. Something shifted, not respect yet, something closer to unease. She saw it in their eyes, the moment they realized she wasn't bluffing, that whatever she lacked in size she carried in stillness, in control. When the ramp closed and the aircraft lifted, she sat shoulder to shoulder with men who didn't trust her. She didn't try to change that. Trust was earned in quieter ways. She checked her rifle, her data, the math taped to the stock. Wind didn't care who held the trigger. Distance didn't care how old you were. Physics didn't care about ego. She closed her eyes as the engines roared. And somewhere deep inside, something settled into place. What makes someone climb when stopping would be safer? The city below didn't sleep. It decayed, broken stone, dead windows, heat lingering where it shouldn't. From above it looked calm. From inside it breathed. She moved when told, spoke only when needed. Every step burned more than the last. The weight on her back felt personal now, like a test designed just for her. The men ahead flowed through rubble like it was water. She followed, refusing to fall behind. The tower loomed. High ground always told the truth first. It also demanded payment. The stairs were gone. The gap stared back at her, empty air and consequences. She didn't call down, didn't explain. She clipped her rifle behind her and reached for rusted steel with hands that did not shake. Fear came later. For a moment she hung there, nothing beneath her but darkness, gravity patient, waiting. Don't breathe. She listened to her body instead of her thoughts. The stone held, barely. When she rolled onto the landing, she stayed there for 3 seconds, long enough to remember that she was human, short enough not to indulge it. By the time her voice came over the radio, it was flat, controlled. She saw what they couldn't. Ground that remembered being moved, heat that didn't belong, a trap built by someone smarter than the last man who tried. She stopped them without raising her voice. They didn't thank her, but they listened. And when the ambush came, it came exactly where she said it would. How far would you bend the rules to save people who never wanted you there? The radios died first, then the geometry shifted. From above, she saw the kill zone draw itself like a map. Lines of fire, angles of death, men about to walk into something that didn't care about bravery. She tried to warn them. Static. She had seconds. She didn't shoot a man, she shot silence. Metal screamed, an alarm wailed, the moment broke. Panic spilled in both directions. The enemy fired too soon. The trap collapsed into chaos instead of certainty. Then the shooting started for real. She became something else then. Not a girl, not a symbol, a function, acquire, breathe, squeeze, cycle. Each shot removed a threat. Each pause cost someone blood. They called her crazy, then they called for her. When the machine gun wouldn't die, she stopped trying to kill it. She changed the battlefield instead. Steel fell. Sightlines vanished. Men ran through dust instead of fire. Inside the tower, footsteps echoed. She went dark. Alone in the stone, pistol raised, she waited while enemies tested doors and lost interest. She didn't move until they were gone, not because she was fearless, but because fear wastes oxygen. Outside, the war shifted again. What do you do when the right shot still feels wrong? She saw the man in the window, saw the woman in front of him, saw the bet he was making. Her finger didn't move. The radio begged, the clock screamed. She aimed at brick instead of flesh, trusted density, trusted numbers she'd memorized when she was younger than the woman in the scope. The wall broke, the man fell, the woman lived. Her hands trembled afterward, just a little. Later they forgot her, counted themselves and moved on, left her alone in the dark with ammo, water, and a choice. She could survive, or she could follow. The bridge waited. She ran through ruins that wanted to swallow her, found the mines just in time, fired a warning so precise it rewrote fate by inches. They listened then. They feared her a little. How much of yourself can you give before there's nothing left? The truck came fast, too fast. The math said no, she did it anyway. 2 shots, impossible distance. Engine shattered, fire bloomed. Her arm bled, she lied about it, wrapped pain tight and kept moving. In a hallway she became prey, flash, smoke. A burning line across her arm, she didn't stop. At the river the crowd came. Not soldiers, people, pushed forward by hate they didn't fully understand. The men froze. Morality is heavy when it's inconvenient. She shot knees, not to kill, to stop momentum, to break a wave without drowning it. It worked. She hated herself for how well it worked. By the time she limped into the light, she wasn't shaking from fear anymore, just exhaustion, and something darker she didn't have words for yet. The helicopter came. So did the boy. Why does survival always ask for one last thing? The explosion didn't kill the aircraft, it wounded it, enough. She hit the ground hard, empty rifle, 1 round left, a tracer, meant for signaling, not salvation. 3 men lined up the shot that would end everything. She waited, geometry aligned, 2 lives behind 1 spine. She fired. The last man panicked, she finished it. The helicopter lifted, hands pulled her inside, darkness closed in. And just before it did, she understood something she would carry forever. She had saved them. But the cost wasn't over. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask permission. Sometimes it doesn't even survive intact. Sometimes it simply acts. Why did the city feel like it was watching her breathe? She noticed it the moment her boots touched the rubble-strewn street, the way sound seemed to pull back, the way the ruins held onto heat like memory. From above, cities look flat, predictable. From inside them, they have depth, corners, intent. She adjusted the sling across her chest and kept moving, aware of every inhale, every shift of weight. The men ahead of her moved with confidence born of repetition. They'd done this dance 100 times. She was the unfamiliar step. No one spoke to her, not out of cruelty, out of habit. She was an attachment, not a fixture, something borrowed for a mission and meant to be returned intact or forgotten. She didn't mind the silence. Silence was honest. The tower rose ahead like a broken spine, its bell chamber split open to the sky. It was the kind of structure commanders loved and soldiers hated, high ground that demanded blood in exchange for clarity. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear exactly, but awareness, the sense that every decision from here on would echo. They reached the base. The others peeled off to secure the perimeter. No one told her to climb. No one offered to help. That was the test. She understood it without resentment. Inside, the stairwell smelled of dust and rot. Stone steps ended abruptly, as if the building had simply given up halfway through. She stopped at the edge and looked up, then down. The drop was enough to end everything loudly. Her heart slowed. People thought courage was loud. It was quiet acceptance. She unhooked her rifle, secured it behind her, and tested the wall with gloved fingers. Rebar jutted out like exposed bone. Old, rusted, unreliable. So was everything else in this place. She climbed. Each movement was deliberate. Test, shift, commit. The burn in her arms grew sharper, but she welcomed it. Pain anchored her in the moment. Halfway up, the metal groaned. Her boots slipped. Gravity reached. For one suspended second, she was weightless, balanced between what she had been told she was and what she knew herself to be. Don't breathe. She obeyed. Let her body settle. Let physics decide. The metal held just enough. She hauled herself onto the landing and lay there, cheek pressed to cold stone, counting heartbeats until the world steadied. When she spoke into the mic, her voice was even. I'm set. Below her, the team stacked up. From this angle, they looked like pieces on a board, white silhouettes against darker ground. She switched optics. Thermal washed the courtyard into shades of truth, empty spaces where emptiness didn't make sense, lines of heat beneath stone. Her brow furrowed. Something was wrong. She adjusted focus, slowed her breathing. The image sharpened, disturbed earth, a pattern too deliberate to be natural. She felt a familiar tug in her gut, the quiet warning she'd learned to trust. She spoke once, calm, specific. The response was skepticism wrapped in urgency. Intel said clear, time mattered, lives always did. She didn't argue, she explained. And for a moment nothing happened. Then someone checked, someone knelt, someone froze. The trap revealed itself like a held breath finally released. No one laughed now. She leaned into the rifle, scanning windows. If there was a trap, there were eyes. She found them in a window that didn't move with the breeze, a heat signature that lingered too long. I see you, she whispered, though no one could hear. Then the radios died. The silence that followed was wrong, not disciplined, jagged, electronic. She tried to call out. Static answered. From above, she saw the shift before it happened. The team redirected toward an alley that promised cover and delivered death. Lines converged. Angles closed. Men on rooftops settled into firing positions with the patience of hunters. She felt something cold settle behind her eyes. She tried again, louder this time. Static. Seconds bled away. She didn't have authority. She didn't have permission. She had geometry and time running out. Her finger moved. She didn't aim at a person. She aimed at inevitability. Metal shrieked. An alarm screamed into the night, tearing silence apart. Below, bodies reacted on instinct, scattering, breaking formation. Above, the enemy panicked. An RPG fired too soon, its roar shaking stone and air alike. The explosion was chaos, but it wasn't slaughter. Gunfire erupted. The ambush collapsed into a fight instead of an execution. She worked the bolt, breath steady, eyes tracking muzzle flashes. One by one, she removed the pieces that mattered most. Not clean, not heroic, necessary. Tracers snapped past her window. Stone chipped, she stayed. If I move, you lose Overwatch, she said, and meant it. Below, someone went down. Heat bloomed where it shouldn't. She felt a flicker of something, guilt maybe, but she pushed it aside. Feelings were for later, now was math. The machine gun on the west roof wouldn't die. She tried angles. Sandbags swallowed rounds like water. She scanned wider, searching for a different answer. She found it hanging by rusted steel. A sign, old, heavy, suspended over the alley like a forgotten promise. She traced the lines in her head. Weight, tension, failure points. Move on my mark, she said, and waited for the doubt to pass. She fired once. Metal screamed. Gravity did the rest. The sign fell, not down, but across, slamming into place and turning open death into hard cover. The firing stopped as if someone had cut the sound. Go, she said. They went. Only then did she let herself breathe. Footsteps echoed below her. She turned away from the window, heart ticking faster now. The fight had come to her. She jammed the door, drew her pistol, waited. Voices passed, boots retreated. She stayed frozen until the danger moved on. When she returned to the scope, the battlefield had shifted again. The team regrouped, the enemy adapted, and somewhere west a shape moved with purpose. Slower, smarter. A counter-sniper. She saw him searching the tower, optics sweeping darkness. She became stone, ignored the cramp blooming in her leg, the ache in her back. She waited him out. He turned away. She didn't shoot. Not yet. Because patience, she realized, wasn't the absence of fear. It was control over it. And control, once learned, was hard to put down. What happens when waiting becomes more dangerous than acting? She felt it before she understood it, the shift in rhythm, the subtle way the city inhaled and didn't quite exhale. From her perch, the fight below had thinned into something deceptive. Fewer shots, longer pauses, the kind of quiet that pretends to be mercy. She knew better. Quiet like this wasn't peace. It was repositioning. Her calf cramped hard, a sharp knot of pain that threatened to pull her out of stillness. She ignored it. Pain was information, not instruction. She adjusted her cheek weld by a millimeter and kept her eye pressed to the glass. The counter-sniper had turned away, convinced the tower was empty. That confidence would cost him later. For now, it bought her time. The radio crackled back to life in fragments, half-words, breathing. A command clipped short. She pieced it together the way she pieced everything together, by listening to what wasn't said. The team was moving, not advancing, not retreating, breaking contact. That was bad. "Hold," she whispered, thumb tight on the push-to-talk. "Dead ground ahead. You're losing overwatch in 20 meters." Static swallowed the warning. Below, white silhouettes surged forward, slipping between shadows and concrete. From above, she could see the geometry unravel. Angles she'd controlled disappeared behind buildings. Windows went blind. Roof lines vanished. The city closed its hand. Her stomach dropped. They crossed the line. The moment stretched thin, then snapped. The street emptied of friendly heat signatures, leaving her alone with the echo of her own breathing and the distant thunder of a fight moving away from her. She called again. Nothing. Jamming surged back, thicker now, like a door slamming shut. She stayed prone for a long count, waiting for instructions that didn't come, waiting for the familiar voice to tell her where to be useful next. The tower felt colder without the purpose of their presence below. Stone pressed into her ribs, dust clung to her lips. Then the transmission slipped through, faint, not meant for her. "Everyone accounted for." The words landed heavier than any recoil. She stared at the radio as if it might correct itself. It didn't. They weren't counting her, not because they hated her, because under stress people revert to what's familiar, to the circle they know by heart. She was outside that circle. The realization stung more than she expected, not because she'd believed herself indispensable, but because a small, stubborn part of her had hoped, irrationally, that she'd crossed some invisible line, that she'd become more than a tool, more than the quiet girl on the tarmac. She swallowed, forced the feeling down. There were worse things than being forgotten. Being wrong was one of them. She scanned west again. The counter-sniper had repositioned, settling into comfort. Nearby, an RPG crew hovered at the edge of readiness, waiting for a signal that would never come if she stayed silent. She could keep them busy. She could wait for daylight. She could survive. And the team would walk into a bridge she knew was rigged. She closed her eyes just once. "They left me," she said to the empty stone. The words tasted like rust. She opened her eyes and moved. Packing was violent and fast. No care for order. She shoved optics and batteries into the bag, zipped it hard, slung the rifle across her back. The weight felt different now, less burden, more promise. She took one last look through the scope, memorizing positions, and then turned away from the window. The descent was reckless compared to the climb. She slid where she could, boots slamming stone, breath tearing out of her chest. At the base, she burst into the alley and didn't stop running. The city rushed at her, close and sharp and loud. She cut corners hard, leapt rubble, ignored the stitch blooming in her side. The river air hit her like a slap, colder, faster, carrying the smell of water and metal. She skidded behind a shattered toll booth and dropped to a knee, lungs burning. Ahead, the bridge arched across black water, beautiful and lethal. They were already moving onto it. She raised the rifle, hands steady despite the sprint, and switched optics. The deck glowed with lies, patches of cold where stone should have been warm, disturbances that spelled graves to anyone who knew how to read them. She keyed the mic, voice sharp now, stripped of patience. "Stop, do not cross, the bridge is mined." Static again. They were running. Mortars walked behind them, urging them forward, 10 meters, 5. She went prone in the wet gravel, slammed the bipod down, loaded the rifle like muscle memory had replaced thought. The wind howled off the river, full value, unforgiving. She dialed without looking. She had no margin. Her target wasn't a man. It was a space, inches between a boot and a wire. "Don't move," she whispered, not sure who she was talking to. She fired. The round cracked into the deck just ahead of the lead runner's foot, concrete exploding upward. The sound passed him before the impact did, a supersonic warning that made his body react before his mind caught up. He threw himself backward, weapon swinging, team scattering into cover. Shouts filled the bridge, accusations, confusion. Then someone saw the wire. Silence followed, thick and stunned. "Check fire," the voice said at last, trembling. That wasn't hostile. She stayed behind the scope while they cleared the path, one careful step at a time. She didn't stand until the last man crossed. Only then did she allow herself to feel the shake creeping into her hands. They looked back toward the city, toward her. Recognition dawned slowly like a bruise. She didn't wait for it. The dust cloud rose on the far road before anyone else noticed. A vehicle, fast and ugly, barreling down toward the bridge. Heavy gun mounted. Exit blocked if it made it. Orders came rapid and desperate. She ignored them. The problem wasn't the driver, it was momentum. The range was obscene, the shot worse. She led the truck into empty air and fired. Worked the bolt like she was angry at it. Fired again. For a long second, nothing changed. Then the engine seized and physics took over. The truck flipped, metal screaming, fire blooming at the bridge's mouth. The team ran through heat and smoke without looking back. Only after the sound reached her did she lie back and stare at the sky, chest heaving, stars blurring. "Don't leave without me," she said into the radio, voice thin. "We're waiting," came the reply. "Different now, careful." She moved to rejoin them and walked straight into the next fight. The hallway was tight, voices below, flashlights snapped up. Gunfire chewed wood and stone inches from her face. She fired blind, shattered light, threw a grenade without counting and ran through ringing silence. The shot that hit her arm came as she broke free into night. Hot, bright, personal. She didn't scream. In the tunnel, she wrapped the wound hard and lied about it, breath shaking despite herself. The rifle felt heavier now. Her left arm screamed when she tried to lift it. She tightened the sling, turned pain into structure. When she emerged on the riverbank, the mob was already forming. Civilians at the front, fighters behind, a wall of bodies driven by fear and fury. The team froze. Morality caught them by the throat. She took the shot that didn't kill, then another and another. Knees shattered, momentum broke. The wave collapsed into screaming and horror. When it was over, she leaned against concrete and closed her eyes, nausea rolling in. The cost had finally arrived. "Perimeter secure," she said, voice hollow. They told her to come home. She did. And as she limped into the light, she understood something she hadn't before. Saving people didn't always feel like salvation. Sometimes, it felt like losing parts of yourself you could never get back. Why did it feel heavier now, after the fighting slowed? The helicopter blades thundered overhead, scattering dust and loose paper into the air like startled birds. She stood at the edge of the extraction zone, one arm pressed tight against her side, the other gripping the rifle that suddenly felt too large for her body. The wound burned in pulses, each one timed to her heartbeat. She told herself it was just pain. Pain was manageable. What unsettled her was the quiet creeping in behind it. They loaded the injured first. Protocol. Faces streaked with ash and blood passed her, eyes briefly meeting hers before sliding away. Gratitude tried to surface in some of them, but it was tangled with something else. Discomfort, maybe. As if acknowledging her meant acknowledging how close they'd come to not making it out. She stepped toward the ramp when motion caught her eye. A child stood beyond the cordon, too still, too calm for the chaos around him. He couldn't have been more than 10. Dust coated his hair, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that hadn't yet learned what hunger was. He watched the helicopter with a kind of patient curiosity that made her chest tighten. He shouldn't be there. She scanned for adults, found none. The crowd had melted back, fear pulling them into alleys and doorways. The boy remained, alone with the noise and the wind. "Hold," she said, raising a hand to the crew chief. Her voice came out rougher than she meant it to. She stepped away from the aircraft and toward the child, every instinct screaming at her to hurry. Open ground. No cover. She moved anyway. The city had already taken enough from her tonight. Up close she saw what the distance had hidden. The boy's hands were clenched around something small and metallic. Not a toy, a trigger. Her pulse spiked. "Hey," she said softly, crouching to his level despite the protest in her arm. "It's okay." He didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the helicopter, then back to her. Confusion lived there, and fear, the kind that gets planted early and grows fast. She followed his gaze and understood. The blast earlier, the noise, the fire. To him, the helicopter wasn't rescue. It was the thing that had taken his street apart. Her mind raced. Orders echoed behind her, distant and urgent. The crew chief shouted. She ignored it all. "Can you show me what you're holding?" she asked, keeping her voice low, steady. The same tone she used when adjusting new shooters on the range, when explaining that control mattered more than strength. The boy hesitated, his fingers tightened. She saw the pin, half-pulled, old device, unreliable, deadly enough. If he panicked, they were both gone. She eased closer, every movement deliberate. Pain screamed. Sweat blurred her vision. She thought, absurdly, of her own hands at that age, empty, unmarked by responsibility. "You don't have to be brave," she said. "You just have to let go." The words surprised her as she spoke them. They were meant for him. They were also meant for her. The boy's lip trembled. He looked at the object, then at her face, searching for something he could trust. She held his gaze, poured everything she had into that stillness. No uniform, no weapon, just a human asking another to choose life. His fingers loosened. The device hit the dirt with a soft, terrible sound. She lunged, scooping him up and turning away as someone else kicked the grenade clear. She didn't look back. She ran, heart slamming, until hands grabbed them both and hauled them into the helicopter. The ramp closed. Only then did she let herself shake. Inside the aircraft, the noise softened into a steady roar. Medics moved in tight choreography, cutting fabric, pressing gauze, asking questions she answered on autopilot. The boy sat across from her, eyes wide, clutching a blanket someone had thrown around his shoulders. He stared at her arm, at the blood. "Hurts?" he asked, voice small. She nodded. Then, because something in her needed honesty, she said, "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and pressed the blanket tighter around her, mimicking what he'd seen the medic do. The gesture broke something open in her chest. She turned away, swallowing hard, and watched the city fall back beneath them. From above, it was quiet again, almost peaceful, the lie of distance. When they landed at the forward base, the world rushed back in. Lights, voices, debriefings waiting like gravity. She handed the boy to a woman who spoke his language, watched as he was led away. He looked back once, just once. She raised her uninjured hand. He disappeared into the crowd. The medic finished wrapping her arm and gave her a look that was half respect, half warning. "You should have said something sooner." She almost laughed, almost. In the debrief room, she stood at the back, leaning against the wall while the others spoke. Names, times, coordinates. Her actions surfaced in fragments, passed around like a tool whose use had been unexpectedly effective. No one said her age. No one questioned why she'd been there. That, she realized, was the change. When it was over, she stepped outside alone. Dawn crept along the horizon, thin and fragile. She breathed it in and felt the weight of the night settle into her bones. She had done what she'd come to do. She had also learned something she hadn't expected. Strength wasn't about how much you could carry into a fight. It was about how carefully you carried what came back out with you. And the hardest part of surviving wasn't the bullets or the blood. It was living with the moments that asked you to choose, quietly, irrevocably, who you were willing to be. Why did the silence after survival feel louder than the battle itself? She woke before the painkillers wore off, staring at a ceiling she didn't recognize. The light was wrong, too clean, too steady. For a moment, her body didn't remember where it was, only that something hurt and something else was missing. Then memory slid back in, slow and heavy. The tower, the bridge, the boy. Her arm throbbed beneath layers of bandage, a deep ache that felt older than the wound itself. She lay still, listening. No mortars, no shouting, just the soft mechanical hum of air circulation and the distant clatter of boots in a hallway. Safety had a sound, she realized, and it made her uneasy. A medic noticed she was awake and checked her vitals without ceremony. "You're lucky," he said, not looking at her. "Bullet missed the bone." Lucky? The word drifted in the air between them, weightless and unconvincing. She nodded anyway. Luck was easier to accept than the alternative, that 1,000 tiny decisions had lined up just right, and that they wouldn't always do that for her. When they left her alone, the quiet rushed in again. Her thoughts followed. She closed her eyes and saw the moment on the bridge, the round striking concrete inches from a boot, the way bodies reacted before minds caught up. She replayed the shot at the engine, the hesitation before firing, the split second where she'd accepted she might miss. She hadn't. That was the problem. Success clung to her now, sticky and complicated. It felt less like pride and more like responsibility. If she could do that once, she would be expected to do it again. To be precise, to be calm, to be the one who solved impossible problems from impossible distances. She turned her face toward the wall and exhaled slowly. No one talked about the weight of being right. They discharged her to light duty that afternoon. Paperwork replaced purpose. She signed forms with her non-dominant hand, each letter crooked and impatient. In the hallway, conversations paused as she passed, not out of reverence, out of uncertainty. She crossed another invisible line. In the mess, someone slid a coffee toward her without comment. Another offered a seat, small gestures, earned maybe. She accepted them with a nod and kept her eyes on the table. Being seen felt strange now, exposing. That night, sleep came in pieces. She drifted in and out, chased by images that didn't ask permission. The boy's hands, the pin, the soft thud as the grenade hit the dirt. Each time she woke, her heart raced as if she were still crouched in the dust, bargaining with a future that hadn't happened yet. On the third night, she stopped fighting it and sat up, feet on the cold floor. She wrapped her blanket tight and stared at the dark window. Her reflection looked older than she felt, or younger. She couldn't tell anymore. Why am I still here? The question came uninvited. She didn't mean alive. She meant in uniform. In this cycle of leaving and returning, of holding lives between finger and trigger. The answer didn't come. Days passed. The operation was written up, sanitized into lines and diagrams. Her name appeared in briefings she didn't attend. Once she overheard someone call her a prodigy. The word made her stomach twist. It suggested ease, talent without cost. She knew better. When she was cleared to return to the range, she went alone. The sun was harsh, unforgiving. She sat up at distance and lay prone, letting her body remember what her mind wanted to forget. The first shot went wide. The second too. Her jaw tightened. Good, she thought, still human. She adjusted, breathed, let the world narrow to fundamentals. By the fifth round, the steel rang true again. The sound echoed across the range, sharp and final. She lowered the rifle and sat back, pulse steady. Pride flickered, then faded. In its place came something quieter, acceptance maybe. She wasn't invincible, she was skilled. There was a difference. A shadow fell across the mat. The lieutenant from the tarmac stood there, hands on his belt, expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once. Not an apology, not praise, recognition. "You did good," he said, as if the words cost him something. She inclined her head. That was enough. Later, as the sun dipped low, she walked the perimeter alone. The base felt smaller now. Temporary. Everything did. She thought about the people she'd saved, the ones she hadn't, the choices that would never stop echoing. Strength, she realized, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself or demand witness. It showed up again and again, even when you were tired of carrying it. Back in her quarters, she wrote a letter she didn't plan to send. To no one in particular. She wrote about the city, the bridge, the boy. About fear and patience and the strange relief of hearing a helicopter fade into distance. She stopped before it became a confession and folded the paper away. Some things were meant to be held, not shared. As lights dimmed across the base, she lay back and closed her eyes. Sleep came easier this time, not because the memories were gone, but because she'd stopped running from them. She understood now that redemption wasn't a moment. It was a practice, a series of quiet decisions made long after the noise faded. Tomorrow, she would shoulder the rifle again, not because she wanted to be extraordinary, but because, when it mattered, she had learned how to be steady. And sometimes, that was enough to change the shape of the world, without anyone ever needing to say her name. Why did the hardest moment arrive only after everything was supposed to be over? She stood at the edge of the runway as dawn bled into the sky, the air cool enough to sting her lungs. The base was waking slowly, generators humming, engines coughing to life, boots striking concrete in uneven rhythm. It all felt familiar now, and that familiarity unsettled her more than the chaos ever had. Routine had a way of hiding how close things came to breaking. Her arm had healed enough to move freely, though a dull ache lingered beneath the skin, a reminder stitched into her muscles. Scars, she'd learned, weren't just evidence of survival. They were punctuation, proof that something had ended and something else had begun. The aircraft idled nearby, waiting. Another mission, another city, different names, same patterns. She watched the crew move with practiced efficiency and felt the quiet question rise again, uninvited but persistent. How many times could she do this and still recognize herself? She remembered the tarmac from weeks ago, the laughter, the disbelief, the way her age had seemed louder than her presence. 18. As if a number could define the weight of a choice or the cost of carrying it. She wasn't angry about it anymore. Anger burned fast and clean. What replaced it was heavier. Responsibility had a longer half-life. A voice called her name, not sharp, not dismissive, just normal. She turned and saw the team gathering, already geared, already moving. One of them handed her a headset without comment. Another adjusted a strap she couldn't reach easily. Small things, thoughtful things. Belonging, she realized, didn't arrive with ceremony. It crept in when no one was looking. As they boarded, she took her seat and rested her head back against the frame. The engines rose in pitch, a familiar vibration settling into her bones. She closed her eyes not to sleep but to steady herself. Images drifted through her mind, not the firefights, not the explosions, but faces. The boy on the bridge, the medic's tired eyes, the lieutenant's single nod. She understood now that the mission hadn't ended with extraction. It had followed her back, unpacked itself quietly in her thoughts, and waited to see what she would do with it. When the aircraft lifted, she opened her eyes and looked around. These men and women would never fully know what she carried. She wouldn't ask them to. Some truths didn't need witnesses to be real. The flight was long. She spent it in a kind of calm she hadn't known before. Not the absence of fear, but a familiarity with it. Fear had stopped being an enemy and started becoming a signal, information to be read, not obeyed. At altitude, sunlight flooded the cabin. Dust motes danced in the beam, fragile and beautiful. She watched them and thought of the bridge again, not as a place of danger but as a point of decision. The moment where waiting had cost more than acting, where she had chosen to step forward without assurance of praise or protection. That choice, she realized, had changed her more than the mission itself. When they landed, the world rushed back in. Orders, timelines, intelligence packets. She absorbed it all methodically without the tightness she once felt in her chest. She wasn't detached, she was grounded. Before they moved out, she paused by the aircraft, hand resting briefly against the cool metal. A private ritual, a way of marking the threshold between who she was and who she needed to be next. She didn't think of herself as brave. Bravery suggested certainty. She had none of that. What she had was clarity, a willingness to act when silence would cost more, a respect for life that didn't disappear when things became complicated. As the team stepped off together, she fell into rhythm with them, no longer ahead, no longer behind. Just present, just ready. Somewhere in another city, another choice would wait for her. Another moment that wouldn't announce its importance until it had already passed. She knew now that she wouldn't recognize those moments by the noise around them, but by the quiet inside herself, the still place where fear, skill, and conscience met. And when that moment came, she would not rush to be seen. She would not demand belief. She would simply act. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't ask to be understood. Sometimes it just steps forward and lets the world change around it.